The halls of Riverrun echoed with whispers of war and betrayal, but for once, House Stark had a moment to breathe. Catelyn sat beside Ned near the crackling hearth, watching the flames dance in ways that reminded her of the chaos they'd somehow survived. Ned, once bound for the executioner's blade in King's Landing, now bore silver in his hair and scars not from battle, but from betrayal and years lost in exile. "I never thought I'd see the North again," he said quietly, his voice laced with both pain and guilt. "Or you." Catelyn reached for his hand, weathered and calloused like her own. "And I never thought I'd have a second chance to fight beside you." Ned Stark's survival had been no miracle, but the result of a web spun by Varys and hidden allies within the Red Keep. After Joffrey's mad command, Ned had been whisked away under the cover of darkness, declared dead to the world. Robb, his eldest, had taken up the mantle of king in the north, marching south with fire in his heart and his father's ghost on his back. And Catelyn, gods, she had wept, burned and buried her own heart for her children. But now the wolf pack had begun to reform. Robb still waged war, young and proud, but he was not alone anymore. His father advised him from the shadows, sending ravens cloaked in false names and riddles. And now, finally, reunited in Riverrun, they were ready to reveal the truth. But it was a truth that had to be timed. The Freys had summoned Robb to the twins to make amends. Lord Walder had been insulted after Robb broke his marriage pact, marrying Talisa of Volantis instead of one of Frey's plain-faced daughters. Catelyn had begged Robb not to go, not to trust the late Lord of the Crossing. But with House Karstark's betrayal still fresh and allies fading fast, Robb had little choice. Now, the decision had to be made. Attend the wedding and hope for peace, or risk offending the Freys even further, possibly losing their crossing and their forces. "I don't trust Walder Frey," Ned said, pacing now. "He's a man who counts debts like a Lannister, and he thinks of loyalty like a whore's coin." "We shouldn't go," Catelyn nodded. "But if we don't show, we insult him again. And he's still holding men we need. Edmure's to be wed. This was supposed to heal wounds." "It smells like a trap," Ned said, eyes narrowing. And that's when the knock came. Robb entered, armor half-strapped, crown off. He looked every bit the boy Ned once carried on his shoulders, yet now he wore the face of a tired king. "Father, mother," he greeted, voice heavy. "The scouts report no unusual movement at the twins. Frey's banners are flying." "The bridge is open," Ned exchanged a look with Catelyn. "Then we go," Ned said. "But we go prepared." The cold air bit through their cloaks as the Stark host approached the twins. The towers loomed like vultures perched on stone shoulders, casting long shadows across the bridge. Ned rode beside Robb, his presence hidden beneath a hooded cloak. Only a few knew he had returned from death. Grey Wind, Robb's direwolf, had known the moment he saw him, bounding forward with a growl that melted into a whimper as he sniffed the air of home and blood. Behind them rode Catelyn, her eyes never leaving the structure ahead. She had dreamt of these towers. In her dreams they bled. "I want guards posted at every corner," Ned said under his breath. "No drinking, no revelry, and no loosening of swords?" Robb nodded grimly. "You think it'll come to that?" "I know men like Walder Frey," Ned replied. "They smile with rotten teeth and plan behind curtains. He doesn't want peace. He wants a lesson written in blood." At the gates, Sir Ryman Frey greeted them with oily courtesy. His words were polished, but his eyes flickered with contempt. "Lord Stark, Queen Talisa, Lady Catelyn, welcome to the twins. My Lord Grandfather eagerly awaits your company." "You honor us," Robb forced a smile. "We hope this union will bring new bonds between our houses." Ryman bowed. "Of course. You're under guest, right? Bread and salt await you." Ned leaned closer to Robb as they passed into the courtyard. Bread and salt is no shield if honor means nothing to the host. Inside, the Freys were already celebrating. Music played, wine flowed, and laughter bounced off stone walls. Edmure Tully, red-faced and already a little drunk, sat at the high table with Roslyn Frey beside him, a frightened, pale girl with trembling hands. The ceremony had already taken place. They were married, and Edmure was too relieved she wasn't a Frey beast to question anything else. Catelyn's eyes scanned every face. Too many frays, too few smiles. Too many armed men in places where none were needed. She felt the weight in her gut, the same one she felt the night Bran fell, the same one before Robb rode off to war. As they took their seats, Ned kept his hand near his sword. He hadn't been a lord in years, but the feel of a blade at his side still calmed him. A servant passed with a tray of wine goblets. Ned watched him carefully, the young thin sweating. He reached for one and caught the boy's sleeve. "Your hands are shaking," he said. The boy froze. "Too much excitement?" Ned asked gently. The servant glanced toward the back hall, a silent, fearful glance. Ned followed it with his eyes and saw a man watching, black-haired, scar on his cheek. Not a Frey. "Who is that?" Ned whispered to Catelyn. She didn't look. "Someone who doesn't belong." Then the doors slammed shut. Catelyn's fingers dug into the wood of the table. The music stopped. The musicians, one by one, placed their instruments down and reached beneath their chairs. Robb stood slowly, his hand brushing Grey Wind's fur. "Is something wrong?" he asked aloud. Walder Frey stood at the high table, his face pulled into a grin so wide it looked painful. "Oh, no," he said. "Everything is just beginning." Arrows rained down from above. But the Starks were ready. Before the first bolt struck, Ned flipped the table and pulled Catelyn down behind it. Robb shouted, and Grey Wind lunged across the hall. Steel sang as swords were drawn. Stark men, placed strategically near doors and corridors, rushed into formation. It wasn't a massacre, it was a battle. And for the first time in a long time, the Starks weren't dying. They were fighting back. Catelyn crawled across broken goblets and overturned chairs to reach Edmure, who had ducked behind the dais. "Get up!" she hissed. "Get your men. Now!" He nodded, sobering instantly, and bolted. Robb moved like a seasoned warrior, his sword flashing in arcs of blood and vengeance. Beside him, Ned fought like a man with nothing to lose. Every Frey who came near them fell screaming. The Frey guards hadn't expected resistance, much less retaliation. Arrows pierced banners, tables overturned, blood-splattered cakes. Then came the fire. Someone lit the drapes. The hall began to smoke. Catelyn caught sight of Lord Walder fleeing through a side door with 2 guards. "Ned!" she shouted. "He's escaping." Ned turned, bloodied, tired, but alive. "Then we finish this now." Smoke clung to the stone ceilings, like a ghost refusing to let go, and the stench of blood, fire, and roasted meat filled the air. Screams echoed off the high walls of the great hall as the chaos churned in every corner. Overturned chairs, shattered dishes, blades clashing steel on steel. Robb ducked an arrow and drove his sword through a Frey soldier's belly, twisting as the man groaned and collapsed. Grey Wind stood over 2 corpses already, snarling, jaws soaked with blood. The direwolf had become a storm in the center of it all, lunging and tearing, ignoring wounds that would have dropped a lesser beast. Ned Stark moved like a man who had died once already. His blade danced without elegance, only cold precision. A swing, a thrust, a parry, every move stripped from decades of duty and survival. He fought like he owed death something, and tonight he meant to repay it with Frey blood. Behind him, Catelyn shouted orders, pulling a wounded Stark bannerman to safety while shielding another with a fallen shield. She was no soldier, but she had survived enough battles to know that survival didn't always come from strength. Sometimes it came from refusing to die when everyone expected you to. "Walder's through the kitchens," she shouted. "He's running like a rat." Robb turned, panting, gripping his sword tightly. "Alive?" "Too alive," Ned muttered, pushing past a collapsing servant to reach the back door. "Come, we end this." They forced their way through the narrow stone hallway, smoke licking the ceilings as flames spread from the hall to the kitchens. The Freys hadn't meant to burn their own keep, but chaos made poor choices inevitable. They found the guards first, 2 brutes with mail armor and cruel smiles. Robb didn't hesitate. He slammed into one, sword flashing, the impact sending the man backward into the wall with a wet thud. Ned blocked the other's spear and ran him through, wrenching the blade free before he hit the floor. Walder Frey stood behind them, trying to unlatch a servant's passage door, his fingers trembling with fear. When he turned and saw them, Ned Stark with fury in his eyes, and Robb beside him like the ghost of vengeance. His knees nearly buckled. "You can't kill me," Walder gasped. "You came under guest right." Ned stepped closer, sword still dripping. "You betrayed guest right first, Frey. You poisoned your own bread and salted your halls with murder. I had no choice," Walder stammered. "You humiliated me. You broke oaths. You turned my daughters into jokes." "You turned yourself into a joke," Robb growled, stepping forward, the firelight painting his face like a wrathful god. "A joke no one will ever laugh at again." Walder's lips trembled, but he stood his ground. "If you kill me, the Lannisters will come. You'll bring the whole kingdom down on your heads." Catelyn stepped out from the smoke behind them, a dagger in her hand, blood smeared across her dress. "The Lannisters already came," she said coldly. "They just didn't finish the job." "But we will." Walder took a step back. "No, please, my lords." Ned raised his sword. "There was a time I believed in mercy. That time ended at the Sept of Baelor. The blade came down. It wasn't clean. It wasn't quick. But it was justice. And when Walder Frey's body slumped to the ground, the whole castle seemed to exhale, the weight of generations of cowardice and treachery collapsing in a single blow. Outside the hall, the fighting had quieted. Most of the Freys were either dead or captured, and the surviving Stark men had taken control of the gates. Grey wind stood over the last dead archer, muzzle red, eyes glowing in the firelight. Catelyn leaned against the wall, breath ragged. "We won?" Ned shook his head. "No, we survived. For now." Robb stood in the archway, looking out at the bodies in the courtyard, men he'd once dined with, trusted, even smiled at. "The North remembers," he said softly. "And the North answers," Ned added. As dawn crept over the distant horizon, the smoke lifted slowly from the smouldering halls of the twins. The wedding had become a funeral. But this time, the wolves had not been the ones slain. They had been the storm. The morning after the Red Wedding, or what was supposed to be one, dawned grey and silent over the twins. A fog rolled in from the river, clinging to the blood-streaked stones like the ghosts of the dead refusing to leave. The fires had been smothered, the halls cleared of corpses, and the Frey banners pulled down and cast into the mud. Catelyn stood on the bridge, her hands gripping the edge tightly, looking down at the slow-moving waters of the Green Fork. She could still hear the screams, the steel, the crackling of fire. It wasn't victory she felt in her bones, it was exhaustion. Every drop of joy was laced with ash. The North might remember, but the price of memory was grief. Ned joined her, silent for a moment before speaking. "You were right not to trust him. I should have listened harder." She didn't look at him, only nodded slowly. "You were right to come. If you hadn't, I would have buried another son." He placed a hand on hers, the quiet between them more intimate than words. After all they had lost, Bran, Rickon, Sansa still in King's Landing, Arya missing, their reunion had been a miracle wrapped in a nightmare. And they were still not done. Behind them, Robb stood in the main hall, no longer decorated in flowers and Frey silks, but draped in the black and grey colours of House Stark. He addressed what remained of the gathered bannermen and riverlords. "We have struck down a traitor," Robb said, his voice heavy with the burden of kingship. "But this war is not won. The Lannisters will answer for this night, make no mistake, and they will use it as a reason to rally more swords. They will say we violated sacred laws. They will call it murder." Roose Bolton stepped forward, his expression as cold as ever. He had arrived late to the twins, his men having taken a longer route through the western hills. Suspiciously late. But with the Freys dead, he was the most powerful northern lord standing beside the Starks, for now. "Let them say what they will," Bolton said flatly. "They said worse when they cut your father's head from his shoulders and paraded it like sport. We've returned the favour, and if you seek vengeance still, my lord, the Dreadfort is at your back." Robb gave him a long, unreadable look. "Are you at my back, Lord Bolton?" Roose didn't blink. Where else would I be? Ned stepped beside Robb then, revealing himself fully to the hall for the first time. Gasps spread through the crowd like wildfire. Lord Wyman Manderley, Sir Brynden Tully and the others stared as if seeing a ghost. Lord Eddard Stark lives, Robb said clearly. He has stood in the fire and returned, and from this day forward he will counsel the king in the north. Manderly stepped forward, bowing deeply. The north rejoices, my lord. Truly the gods are not finished with House Stark, but others were less eager. Lord Karstark's cousin stood stiffly, arms crossed. With respect, your grace. What else has been hidden? What other truths wait in the shadows? Ned didn't flinch. I stayed hidden to protect my children. I let the world think I was dead, so that Robb could rise without my name, casting doubt on his crown. I will not apologize for doing what I must to see my family safe. Silence followed, broken only when Robb nodded. My father speaks the truth, and he speaks with my voice. If any man wishes to challenge that, step forward now. No one moved. Later that evening, as the surviving Frey prisoners were marched to the dungeons, Catelyn walked the corridor with Sir Brynden Blackfish at her side. He glanced at her sideways. You know this isn't the end, don't you? I know, she said, voice low. We just won a battle, but we've opened a wound the South won't let heal. Then maybe it's time we stop healing and start cutting deeper, the Blackfish said. That night a raven arrived. It bore the Lannister seal. Catelyn opened it by firelight, her hands trembling. The letter was short, signed by Tywin Lannister himself. We see you. We know what you've done, and we are coming. The letter from Tywin Lannister burned in Catelyn's hands long after she dropped it into the hearth. Its words were few, but they struck like arrows through bone. We see you. We know what you've done, and we are coming. And when Tywin Lannister said he was coming, he didn't mean with letters or messengers. He meant with armies, gold and fire. By the end of that week, word had already spread throughout the Riverlands. The Red Wedding had not been a massacre of Starks. It had become a massacre of Freys, a reversal no one had expected. But the story twisted in the mouths of the Lannister allies. They called it the butchering of the twins, a violation of sacred guest right, an unforgivable offense. In King's Landing, the small folk were told that Robb Stark had brought his father back from the dead using wild magic. That Catelyn was a witch who slit Lord Walder Frey's throat with her own hands while laughing, and that Ned Stark, the so-called Honourable Lord, had broken the oldest law in Westeros, murder under the protection of guesthood. The Crown now had justification, a new campaign, a holy war cloaked in vengeance, and worst of all, they had a new weapon. The raven that came next did not carry threats but a name, one Catelyn hadn't heard in moons. One that turned her blood to ice. Sansa, captured, they said, publicly in chains. Tywin had paraded her through the streets of King's Landing in full Stark regalia, forced to recite her family's crimes while the crowd threw rotten fruit. She was no longer a pawn. She was bait. And it worked. She's alive, Catelyn whispered, her voice cracking. Ned sat in silence by the fire, staring into the flames. He hadn't spoken for a long time after reading the message. It's my fault, he said finally. I left her there. I trusted— No, Catelyn snapped, standing. You did what you thought was right. We all did. But they have her now, and they know what that means. Robb entered the chamber just then, anger simmering beneath the surface. They're daring us to come south. They don't think we will, Catelyn said. They think we'll hesitate, that we'll cling to honor again. Ned looked at his son. And will we? Robb was quiet a long moment, then said, We'll go, but we won't go as we did before. This time, we burn everything we leave behind. Roose Bolton watched from the ramparts of the twins as the Stark army began to move again, this time southward. Their banners fluttered not just with wolves, but flames. They no longer fought for independence, they fought for revenge. He stood with his bastard Ramsay, who had arrived only days before from the Dreadfort. The boy, if he could be called that, wore a grin that never seemed to leave his face. Will you tell them, Ramsay asked lazily, that you were late on purpose? That you meant to let the Freys do their part first? No, Roose said coolly. Let them believe what they want. When wolves tear at lions, flayed men always find meat to scavenge, Ramsay chuckled. Do I get to play now? Roose turned slowly. Soon. There are still too many eyes. But chaos is close. By the time the Stark army reached the Trident, they found it guarded, not by soldiers, but by a single rider bearing a white flag. He wore golden armor and rode a red stallion. The lion of House Lannister stamped on his chest, but the face beneath the helm stopped everyone in their tracks. Catelyn staggered forward, disbelief and horror mixing in her throat. No, it's not possible, but it was. Jaime Lannister, alive, freed, whole, and worse, smiling. "I've come to treat," he said calmly, removing his glove. "Lord Stark, Lady Stark, Your Grace, I have a message from King Tommen and Lord Tywin." Ned stepped forward slowly. "Speak." Jaime's smile widened. "The king offers peace. One daughter returned. One father forgiven. All it costs is the head of the young wolf." Silence fell like snow. Robb didn't even blink. "Then you've ridden all this way for nothing," Jaime sighed. "So be it." He turned his horse and rode off, alone, untouched, into the mist. As the sun fell over the riverlands, the North knew war had truly begun. Not for banners, not for thrones, but for blood. The riverlands were bleeding again. Villages burned in the distance as the Stark host marched south, their passage marked by scorched fields and hollow-eyed peasants who watched from behind broken doors. War had returned, not with pageantry and banners, but with ash, smoke, and the heavy footsteps of wolves no longer interested in justice, only survival. Robb Stark no longer smiled. He no longer spoke unless necessary. His armor was darker now, blackened steel, scratched and battered, and Grey Wind had taken to patrolling ahead of the army like a ghost, appearing and disappearing through trees and fog. Ned rode beside his son, though fewer called him Lord Stark now. Most called him the Revenant, a dead man walking, a wraith with a sword. The tale of his return had grown, twisted by rumor. Some said he had been raised by the old gods, others by blood magic. Either way, the Lannisters feared him, and that was good. Catelyn remained in the rear, handling ravens, tending wounded, and keeping the lords united. Roose Bolton rode quietly among them, always too quiet and always watching. They had crossed into territory controlled by House Darry when the first scout returned with word. "A rider," he said breathlessly, "headed straight for us, and from the east, alone, fast." Robb frowned. Another Lannister envoy? But when the rider broke the horizon, kicking up mud and leaves behind her, Catelyn knew instantly. She dropped everything and ran. The horse slid to a halt, and the rider dismounted in a single fluid motion, pulling back her hood. Long brown hair, cold grey eyes, a face thinner than Catelyn remembered, but unmistakable. "Arya," she gasped. The girl, no, not a girl anymore, looked up at her mother with something between relief and wariness. Then she stepped forward, slow at first, and buried herself in her mother's arms. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Behind them, Ned stood frozen. He hadn't seen Arya since that day in King's Landing, since he'd told her to run, to be quick, to be silent, to survive. And she had. He approached, and Arya pulled away from her mother, her face flickering between defiance and emotion. "You look older," she said, eyeing him. "You look dangerous," he replied. She smiled, just a flicker, and that was enough. Later, around the fire, Arya told them everything. About Harrenhal, about the road, about the Hound, about Braavos, and about the list. "I came back because I heard about the twins," she said. "About Walder Frey, I had him on my list." Robb blinked. "You had a list?" Arya nodded. "Names, people who wronged us, people who need to die." "Who else is on it?" Ned asked carefully. She didn't hesitate. "Cersei, Elyn Payne, Gregor Clegane. Meryn Trant was, but he's dead. I handled that." "You handled?" Robb said, eyes narrowing. Arya pulled a thin dagger from her boot, its edge curved, foreign, silent. "Valyrian steel. They call me no one in Braavos," she said. "But I remember who I am, Arya of House Stark, and I came home to kill Lannisters." Catelyn stared at her daughter, her once wild, stubborn, lovely child, and saw something else now. Not a girl, not quite a woman. A blade forged in loss. Ned took her hand. "You're home now. But what's coming next? It won't be like anything you've known." "I don't need safe," Arya said. "I need justice." The army moved again, faster now. Arya rode ahead with the scouts, moving like a shadow, vanishing into forests and returning with news of Lannister movements. Their path led them straight to Harrenhal. It stood like a carcass on the edge of a poisoned lake, black stone melted by dragonfire, its towers gaping like broken teeth. The last report had said Gregor Clegane was stationed there with a force meant to intercept the Stark army. He was gone when they arrived. Only corpses remained. Bolton's men scouted the walls. Catelyn and Ned entered the courtyard and found dozens of Lannister soldiers, throats slit, eyes wide, and painted on the wall in dried blood. Valar Morghulis. Arya stepped forward from the shadows behind them. I couldn't wait. Ned looked at her. She didn't flinch. He was on my list. Outside, Robb stared up at the cursed towers. They'll know we're coming now. They knew before, Ned said quietly. Now they just know we're angry. And they've taken Sansa, Arya added, her voice cold. I'm going to get her back. No, Robb said, eyes locked on the horizon. We are. As night fell over Harrenhal, the wolves regrouped. And south, in King's Landing, Queen Regent Cersei stood on the Red Keep's balcony, staring northward, the letter from Jaime trembling in her fingers. He refused, she muttered. Beside her, Sir Qyburn placed a hand on a wooden crate, bolted shut, humming lowly. Then perhaps it's time we show them what we've made, he said softly. Inside the crate, something snarled. The Red Keep had never felt colder. Sansa Stark sat alone in her tower chamber, the stone walls pressing in like a cage. She no longer cried. She hadn't cried in weeks. Not since the first time Cersei paraded her through the streets, chained like a dog, while the gold cloaks shoved the crowd back with the flat of their spears. They had spit at her. Called her traitor, bastard, wolf whore! She held her head high that day, and every day after. They wanted her to break. But Sansa Stark had lived with monsters before. Now she waited. Cersei visited her that morning, draped in gold and crimson, her lips curled in a smirk, too proud to be real. She poured her own wine, drank slowly, and circled Sansa like a hawk around a dying rabbit. You should be grateful, she said at last. Your father lives. Your brother, too. That's more than I ever gave my enemies. Sansa said nothing. Cersei leaned down, lips brushing close to her ear. They're coming for you. Do you think they'll win, or do you think they'll die? For nothing? Sansa looked up at her, eyes sharp as broken glass. You sound afraid. Cersei slapped her hard and fast, not in rage, but as if to remind her of the order of things. You'll beg me before this ends, she said calmly. You and your pack of savages. When she was gone, Sansa stood by the window and looked north, toward the invisible line that divided hope from despair. She had one chance, and it started with a risk. At Harrenhal, the Stark camp was alive with tension. Ravens flew back and forth, carrying news of Lannister troop movements and small folk uprisings. The Riverlands were stirring, hearts ignited by the story of the Frey's fall. Some banners returned. Others waited to see if the wolves would make it to the gates of King's Landing before Tywin's hammer fell. In the command tent, Arya spread out a crude map of the capital. If we try to breach the gates with force, they'll kill her before we cross the bridge, she said. We need to get inside first. You want to sneak in alone? Robb frowned. It's suicide. I'm not asking for permission, Arya said coldly. I've worn faces before. I can wear another, Ned shook his head. Not alone. You may have learned the arts of death, but this isn't just an assassination. This is a war. You can't fight it with shadows alone. Catelyn turned to him. Then what do you propose? He looked at the map, then at Arya. We give her something they won't expect, something they fear more than soldiers. He turned to Rose Bolton, who stood silently in the corner. You said you have tunnels beneath the city. Rose nodded. Old smugglers' paths, forgotten even by the gold cloaks. But I can't guarantee they're safe. Ned's voice was steel. Neither is staying out here. Arya gave a grim smile. Then let's make a mess. That night the letter reached Sansa's cell, tucked beneath the crust of a loaf of bread. A familiar scrawl, written in charcoal. A girl with no name remembers. Stay alive. The pack is near. Sansa pressed the note to her chest and smiled for the first time in weeks. She began planning. In the Red Keep's lower chambers, Qyburn led Cersei down a spiraling stairwell into the dark. Torches sputtered, iron doors lined the walls, and behind the last one, chained and snarling, was the thing they had kept hidden since the Battle of Blackwater. Once Sir Gregor Clegane, now something else. He no longer spoke. He didn't need to. He breathed barely. His eyes glowed faintly yellow in the dark. His strength had only grown. "You want to release that into the city?" Jaime asked, horrified when he learned of it. Cersei simply turned to him and said, "If the wolves reach our gates, I will unleash more than fire. I will unleash death itself." 3 days later, as dawn broke over the capital, smoke rose in the east. The Stark army had arrived, and with them, behind the main host, came a smaller force, Manderley knights, Karstark riders, and the remnants of the Brotherhood without banners. Arya had made contact. Thoros was dead, Beric gone, but the flames still burned in the hearts of their followers. That night, Arya slipped into the city, wearing a face no one recognized, and carrying a dagger sharp enough to end a queen. The bells of King's Landing tolled at dusk, long, low, mournful notes that rolled over the city like a funeral dirge. But no one had died, not yet. Inside the Red Keep, guards doubled their patrols. Every gate was sealed, every wall manned, and every servant's passage watched. The Lannisters expected fire. They expected an army crashing through the gates, trebuchets hurling stones, the Stark banners raised in defiance. What they didn't expect was silence. Arya Stark moved like breath. She slipped through shadowed halls beneath borrowed faces, a Tyrell servant, a scepter, a rat-faced page boy, each discarded as soon as it was no longer needed. She was everywhere and nowhere, following the map of tunnels Roose Bolton's spies had confirmed. Her blade, needle, stayed hidden. She wouldn't use it unless she had to. No, this wasn't for her list. This was for her sister. In the tower overlooking the sea, Sansa waited. She hadn't seen Arya yet, hadn't heard from anyone since the note. But she'd made her move. Earlier that morning, she'd poisoned the wine tray in the Queen's council room, not to kill, but to weaken. Cersei hadn't drunk, but 3 of her advisors had collapsed. It sent the message: you are not safe, not in your own court, not even in your own skin. And when the shadows crept into her room at midnight, and the door creaked open with no guards in sight, Sansa didn't scream. She whispered, "Arya?" Her sister stepped into the light, face bare at last, older, hardened, but hers. Sansa rushed forward and held her, trembling. They didn't speak for a while. There were no words that could bridge years of pain and miles of war. "I'm here to get you out," Arya said finally. Sansa pulled back. "No, I'm not leaving." Arya frowned. "What?" "I have to stay for now. I've planted too much. I know too much. The Red Keep is rotten, Arya, and I've been in the cracks long enough to see where it can be broken." Arya looked at her with something like disbelief. "You sound like Littlefinger." Sansa didn't smile. "I learned from him, and from Cersei. But I'm still a Stark." Arya hesitated, then reached into her cloak and pulled out a second note. "Father wants you safe. Robb too. They're waiting just outside the city." Sansa took the letter and pressed it to her heart. "Then tell them to give me 3 days. After that, if I'm not free, bring the wolves." At the walls of King's Landing, the Stark army waited under black banners. No horns, no war drums, just silence and the cold bite of expectation in the air. Robb stood in full armor, Grey Wind at his side, Ned and Catelyn behind him. "She's inside," Arya said quietly, having returned just before dawn. "She's not ready to leave, but she's alive." Robb didn't speak. His jaw clenched. His hands never left his sword's hilt. "We should strike now," Roose Bolton said softly, "while their confusion grows. Delay, and we risk reinforcement." But Ned shook his head. "We wait 3 days. That's what Sansa asked." Bolton's eyes narrowed. "And if the girl was broken?" "Lying to buy time." Ned turned to him, voice iron. "She is my daughter. She's a Stark of Winterfell. She does not lie to survive. She survives to win." Day 2 passed with tension thick as smoke. Inside the keep, Sansa made her final moves. She passed notes through the scullery, spoke to abused servants, bribed disillusioned gold cloaks. She whispered truths about Cersei's madness, her experiments with Qyburn, the abomination they called Sir Gregor. And then, on the third night, the bells tolled again. This time, for real. A fire broke out in the sept near the Great Hall. Someone had ignited the wine stores. A distraction. As guards rushed to contain the blaze, Sansa was already slipping through the hidden passage Arya had mapped. The same one used by Varys, by Tyrion, by countless ghosts of the past. Arya met her near the dragon skulls. But they weren't alone. A figure stepped from the shadows, armored head to toe in black and gold, a great sword across his back. Ser Gregor, or what remained of him. Arya pushed Sansa behind her and drew needle. Her heart pounded, but her hand was steady. Gregor moved with unnatural speed, inhuman. He struck like a hammer, and Arya dodged by inches, blade scraping stone. "Run!" she yelled. Sansa hesitated, then turned and fled down the passage. Arya fought, ducked, slashed, rolled, but she wasn't strong enough. Not alone, until a second blade punched through Gregor's neck from behind. Valyrian steel. Ned Stark stepped from the smoke, eyes hard, breath ragged. "You don't touch my daughters," he said. Gregor fell with a metallic groan, twitching, and then was still. Arya looked at him, stunned. "How?" Ned looked at the sword in his hand. Ice reforged and returned by Gendry just days ago. The ancestral blade of House Stark. "No more running," he said. At the gates of King's Landing, the people awoke to find them wide open. No guards, no horns, just the wolves marching in. Robb led them through the city as small folk stared in silence. Many dropped to their knees. Others wept. In the Red Keep, Cersei stood alone in the throne room. Qyburn dead. Jaime vanished. The Mountain slain. She sat on the Iron Throne, unmoving, wine in hand. When Robb, Arya, and Sansa entered, she raised her glass. "So the little wolves finally win." "No," Sansa said. "The North endures." "That's not the same." Arya stepped forward. "You're not on my list anymore." Cersei looked at her, almost smug. "Mercy?" Arya leaned in. "No, oblivion," and Sansa turned her back as Arya slid the dagger home. Quick, quiet, clean. Winter had come to King's Landing. But for once, it brought peace. The Iron Throne was melted. The North was never ruled again. And Ned Stark, the man who had died once, lived again, and lost more than any man should, sat beside his wife in Winterfell once more. Arya sailed west. Her list complete, Robb ruled the Riverlands, but not as king, as protector, and Sansa rebuilt, because some wolves survive and some wolves return, but the smart ones, they reign.